The Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast is sponsored by Beer Edge. I'm Andy Crouch, the co-founder of Beer Edge, along with my partner and your podcast host, John Hall. John and I work hard to bring you fresh and insightful content related to the ever-changing world of craft beer. We're passionate about beer and independent journalism. If you're interested in supporting Beer Edge, visit our website, beeredge.com, which is updated regularly with new content, interviews, and articles. Please also consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your episodes. You can also subscribe to the Beer Edge newsletter on our website. Is there anyone you think that we should be talking to? Please drop us a line at andy@beeredge.com with your thoughts. And as always, thanks for your support.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this week I'm very pleased to share with you an interview I recently did with Garrett Oliver about his efforts to launch the Michael Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling. And I'm also happy to tell you that this episode is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to subscribe to the newsletter written by myself and Andy Crouch. And also be sure to follow Beer Edge on social media at The Beer Edge. And please take a moment to review the show on your podcast platform of choice. Most people know Garrett Oliver as the globe-trotting brewmaster of the Brooklyn Brewery, but he's also an accomplished author, educator, and thought leader in the brewing space. His latest project is one that we can all get behind and support. It's a foundation named after the late Michael Jackson, the writer. Its mission is funding technical education and career advancement for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the brewing and distilling industries. This interview was originally recorded for an article I was working on for Wine Enthusiast magazine, but there's so much more in here that couldn't make it onto the page that we're sharing a slightly edited version of the conversation with you today. My thanks to the magazine for allowing me to air this. The conversation was recorded in mid-July, before the fund's website, located at themjf.org, went live. But you can go there and find the Donate tab. You might hear me reference the upcoming article, which has since been released, and you can find that at winemag.com. Garrett spoke to me from Brooklyn, and I started off by asking him how the idea for the foundation came about. Here's the conversation.
Yeah, this started off as 20 years ago. I'll go back. There was a fund started called the Michael Jackson Fund, and it was for brewing and distilling scholarships, and it was under the American Institute of Wine and Food, AIWF.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember them.
No.
You're probably a little young for it. They were in the 90s. They were a pretty well-known organization. They didn't really do awards and stuff the way the Beard House does, but they did huge events, like down at the Seaport in Manhattan, when the Seaport was really a going concern. They were down there doing big beer and food events, and were the first of the big organizations to really pay any attention to beer. And so they did a lot of good stuff, and they established this Michael Jackson Fund. I didn't have that much to do with it, but of course, Michael was one of my best friends.
Yeah.
And then later, after Michael had passed, in 2014, Tom Potter, who was one of the founders of Brooklyn Brewery, also founder of New York Distilling Company.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, he had been running the AIWF, and he said, we'd like to raise some more money for this fund, and we had fundraiser. And at the fundraiser, Nancy Johnson from GABF was nice enough to send out the banner of Michael that hangs above the floor, the enormous one that hangs above the floor at GABF.
Yeah.
And we had a bunch of people in.
I was there that night. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
And so that was great. It was a relatively smallish affair, but it was fun, etc. Cut to last year, and Tom comes back to me and he says, we never really got a chance to do anything with that fund. It's been sitting there, moribund, for 5-6 years. It's got $30,000 in an account, and really AIWF is done, and I want to wrap it up and close all our books. So can you help me basically disperse these funds? Sit with me and we'll give away these scholarships. And he said, well, maybe we'll just put it through a cooking school. You're working with some people, and we'll give it away that way. We'll be able to make 5, 6, 7 scholarships, and I'll be done with this thing. And what I said to him was, I'd be very happy to help you, um, but only if these scholarships are aimed predominantly in the direction of people of color. And at first, I don't think Tom quite understood how serious I was about that stipulation. But eventually I said, like, if that is not part of what we're doing, then I'm not going to be involved. That's my price. And so, he came around to my way of thinking. We started working on it. And in there, I was saying to myself, this is like October, November. I'm saying to myself, this thing doesn't have to stop after 5 or 6 scholarships. It could be a foundation. But at the time, I was traveling 10, 12, overseas trips a year. I'm constantly on the road. Things are very busy at the brewery. There's no time to think. And, I was unable to focus on it, even though we had discussed it. Well, obviously, suddenly we all got a lot more time to think, much more than we ever wanted. And then the social movement came along. And I just realized that, rather than taking the next 6, 8 months to put this thing together, while people's attention was concentrated on social justice issues, this was, a good time to launch this as an initiative. I mean, it's a very difficult time to do it and to do it this quickly. But I think that we've seen in the past, despite everyone's good intentions, that momentum is eventually lost. Things eventually leave the news cycle, and then we end up back where we were. And I'm motivated by a couple of things. One was the having attended last year in Pittsburgh, Fresh Fest, which you may have heard of.
Yes.
And so I have to admit that at first, the first year when they got in touch with me about Fresh Fest, and they told me this was an African American run beer festival, I didn't really quite understand it. I came out of the 60s and 70s, and to me, this sounded like a segregated beer festival, kind of a festival for Black people. And I'm saying to myself, well, what's wrong with the regular festivals? It's like, I don't feel like they're unwelcoming. People are friendly. Why don't we just go to those, the way that I have? And so, I didn't go. They asked me again last year, and by that time, my thinking had moved along because, frankly, in 30 years of sitting in the chair running breweries, I have not had a single African American applicant for a brewing job ever.
Is that
Not
true?
one. Yes, that is true.
Jesus.
Not one. I have sent Iraqis to brewing school. I have sent Gambians to brewing school. I've had, people from Haiti, Afghanistan, all sorts of people working for Brooklyn Brewery, and I'm proud of that. We've helped people stand for their citizenship. But I've never had a single African American applicant. And so my previous outlook on this was that, well, they there were not enough African Americans who were interested. And then you start paying more attention, to the overall background of things. And I kind of came to realize that, I had become not blind to the situation and plight, of people of color in the United States, but specifically within the brewing industry, which I think of as being very open, et cetera. And it is to an extent. However, the fact is that we live in a really segregated country.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to your average, perfectly nice, liberal, white person, he has precisely 1.2 Black friends, and like we don't mix very much. We don't mix in restaurants. We don't mix in bars. I was listening to the Sporkful podcast, last night where they were talking about what they call the 60-40 rule, which a lot of restaurateurs say, well, like once your restaurant becomes 40% Black patrons, it's then a Black restaurant and all the white people run away. There's a lot of background darkness, to the American psyche that we don't really face. And the fact of the matter is, we hire people who show up in front of us. And, who shows up in front of us is influenced by, how comfortable they feel showing up, what they've been exposed to, et cetera, et cetera. And African Americans have never been in any way invited into beer and brewing. We were not really in the business of inviting anybody. We just say, here's our tent, everybody come. But it doesn't actually work that way. For a lot of people in real life and emotionally, I, through my background, was given a lot of tools that allow me to comfortably walk into any room, regardless of it, and feel like I belong there. That's not most people. It's not most people of any background, and it certainly isn't most African American people. So I wanted to do something that would give people a leg up, to make up for these disparities. And really, I mean, the same sort of thing that we've done for people from other countries where they may be working for our brewery for a couple of years. And we say, okay, you're doing great. You're very smart. You're hardworking, but you have no formal training, on the bottling line. We taught you the bottling line, but you don't know anything really about the background of everything about how this works. So let's send you to the Master Brewers Association packaging school course for like 4 weeks. And you come back, you'll have a certificate and something of a formal grounding in how this entire thing fits together. And you get back a different person who is more employable, not just for you, but for their own career, and who has more confidence, and in whom you can have more confidence, as an employer. And so that in of itself is, a type of pure good. And I have said to myself, and also to officials, whether it is at BA or it is at Camera in the UK, why are people not doing training?
Mm-hmm.
I've been running conferences, technical conferences in Sweden and in Norway for years. Serious CBC style conferences with really great speakers, stuff that these brewers could not possibly learn anyplace else. Bringing in, Avery Swanson, Avery from when she was at Jester King,
yeah.
and the folks from Wild Beer Company coming to show people, okay, talk to them about indigenous and wild fermentation. This is stuff that they weren't otherwise going to get. I've dedicated myself to educating people in other countries and in our country, and nobody who looks like me, basically almost ever in front of me. And, there's a problem there, and I think that, from my point of view, I have to face the fact that, in not doing anything specific to try to solve the problem, you therefore become part of the problem. Because the status quo is fine for you, you've done well, and, now you're sitting in your perch and, you're comfortable. Well, a lot of people are not comfortable, and no one's offering them any opportunities. How many people have I hired from American Brewers Guild? It's a great school.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we hire those people. But that education is $12,000,
Right.
in $9,000. And so, that's expensive. And then on top of that, not only do you have a situation where African Americans on average have 1/10 the family assets of white Americans. So that's going to affect, can you pay $10,000 for this course? And then you have to know the right people who are going to give you letters of recommendation. Like, well, who do you know?
Yeah.
And so all this comes into play.
And it's also in Vermont.
Yes. And that in of itself, for some people, can present a challenge. If say you're from the inner city and you've never been to a place like Vermont, you might actually show up and not be very happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know, and if you reverse all of that, you say, well, that's ridiculous. People are awfully nice. It's like, okay, well, turn it around and imagine yourself as a white American walking into a school or whatever else where 98% of everybody was black,
Sure.
or a town or whatever else. You like to think you'd be comfortable, but there's a, there there's the background radiation of America that you can't quite make go away, no matter how nice you are. And I think that the solution requires being honest, about where we are and like doing something to address it. So I think there are many ways to do that, and that many people have started to do things, and that my thing is just a part of it. It's one way, of doing this, and I'm specifically addressing technical education for brewers and distillers. So we're not paying for Cicerone courses or things like that, even though we respect them and think that they're great.
Yeah.
We're going to focus on a few things that we're going to try to do really well. We're going to provide mentorship. Each scholarship comes with a mentor, a person of color within the industry who's several years ahead of them, and so that they have somebody to talk to. If that relationship for some reason doesn't work, we find you another one. But you don't end up out there like, oh, here's a course, sink or swim. Good luck.
Yeah.
See you around sometime. We see you through. Is the idea.
So yeah, and it almost sounds like, so rather than Cicerone and some of those, this is more like teach a man to fish kind of thing.
Yes, and yes, exactly so. And so we'll start off probably with people who are already in the industry and have one foot in. There are a lot of people who may have gone from being a dishwasher to being a brewer,
Mm-hmm.
But are doing the work by rote and don't actually understand necessarily the science and everything else behind it because nobody ever taught them.
Yeah.
And they may not have access to the books. And so if they're willing and they're going to apply themselves and their employer says, yeah, this is a hardworking person and we'd love to see him get this opportunity, we want to be able to back that up. And I think that is a thing that that craft brewing believes that it's good at, but has not been good at so far. And so I think that to a certain extent, through this program, both the customers and the industry can become the kind of industry they always thought they were, and that they have acted like they were in public, but perhaps have not actually been.
So just to go back and just so I'm clear on this, so the initial 30 grand from the old organization was that
is now seed money for the new one.
Okay. And then do you have fundraising goal numbers in mind? Like what you'd like to, yeah.
On the public campaign, and there's really two parts of it. There's the public campaign, which at least at first is going to go largely through, GoFundMe.
Yeah.
And should be live within days. The public campaign has a goal of $200,000, which is actually relatively low. If you look at say an ABG education is $10,000, $200,000 is actually only 20 people.
Yeah.
So it's not that much. What I am hopeful of is that we are going to see, uptake from from individuals of means, from breweries, from distilleries, and that people will eventually stand this thing up into something that can send, say 20 people to brewing and distilling school every year,
mm-hmm.
Or more, if we have that many applicants, and there will be a built out full board, and there will be a board process. And I've done that kind of work before, for Slow Food and right now for the Museum of Food and Drink. So I'm quite familiar with how that kind of stuff runs.
Sure.
And, my term as board chair will be 5 years, after which I will step down and will not be doing it again.
Okay.
And so what that means is that there will be a succession to a presumably younger person, who, has put themselves into the work and can carry that thing forward, without having some old dude in their way, trying to sort of, hog a spotlight or whatever else. My utility here is in the fact that I'm sitting in this chair where I can get people to look at me for a minute.
The naming it after Jackson, was that just because this is a continuation of the old program? I mean, did you think about?
No, I mean, I think that it is a shame that so many younger brewers don't even know, who Michael was.
Yeah.
Um, he pretty much invented the kind of universe that we're all living in. When it comes to like beer styles, et cetera, et cetera. They don't know who he was. They haven't read his books, which despite their age are still beautiful and relevant. And as a result of that, they can never really fully feel the depth of the culture that we're engaged in. I don't mean all the younger people, but I mean there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I think that the kind of thing that you were talking about, where you have, your bottles and cans exploding or whatever else, is a symptom of not having sufficient self-respect. And that self-respect really comes from being part of a great tradition. I mean, this is not, to me, brewing is not like a job. It's a calling. This is a great, you should be embarrassed to bring shame to this great tradition.
Yeah.
And I think that if you read Jackson's books, I mean, he makes you feel it. And I think that, that was his part, in the culture. He was also, I mean, about as actively anti-racist a person as you could imagine. In his
Right.
early days, he worked for radical publications. And believe me, in 1991, 92, when I was first judging the Great British Beer Festival, and in walks this young black guy from Queens, and they're like, well, he's going to be, sitting at the final table with us to choose champion beer of Britain. There were definitely some people there who were like, who the hell is that? And what the hell is he doing here? They'd never seen like any black people in those back rooms at all. And there's all kinds of whispers and whatever else. And Michael told everybody, like, this is the guy. He knows more about your beer than you do, and you do well to pay attention to it. And like Michael just stood them down. He wasn't having any of it. Him, Roger Protz, and one or two other people. But Michael was adamant. And I wouldn't be here, at least not, as this guy, as the Garrett Oliver, without Michael. And so I think that, the same way that, not that I'm putting myself in the shoes of Tony Bennett, but when Tony Bennett started a music school, he called it the Frank Sinatra School.
Okay.
He didn't call it the Tony Bennett School of Music.
Yeah.
Because he knew that, that in the end, Frank Sinatra was more important, and had done more in this area and that area, and was something for people to look back on and be inspired by. And, he wanted to get himself out of the way and let people be inspired by, where, that particular part of the culture, part of where it comes, comes from. And whenever you heard, Tony Bennett talk, he was always talking about Louis Armstrong. It was either Louis Armstrong or Frank Sinatra as the people that he really looked up to. But then under that umbrella, the two actual scholarships are then named for people of color. And people have been fascinated by the story of Sir Jeff Palmer,
Mm-hmm.
who I met when I was emceeing the Scottish Brewing Awards a few years ago. And everybody's like, have you met Jeff? Have you met Jeff? Have you met Jeff? And I didn't know who he was. And I meet this guy, and he's like Yoda. And everybody knows him. Everybody loves him. And he's the most accomplished, brewer in many ways in the UK, and also a tireless civil rights activist, for the last 40 years. So I recently had a Zoom call, with him for 2 hours that started at 9 o'clock in Scotland. And mind you, he's 80.
Yeah.
And he gave me so many ideas and ways to think about how to do this stuff and whatever else. I mean, just so, so wise as a mentor to me in doing this thing. And just made me realize, it's like, okay, you might think that you're clever, but But it's like I'm 58 or I'll be 58 next week and he's 80. And then I can advise, somebody who's in their 30s who can advise somebody who's in their 20s or, whatever. But, setting something up where you give people tools and then you give them somebody to work with who's closer to their own experience than I'm going to be. I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to ask me, Garrett, how to get into the brewing industry, like, how the hell should I know? you know, I mean, I'll give you some pretty good but fairly standard pad advice about like, hey, you should, try to do this and try to do that and think about it this way. But if you want the real stuff, you need to talk to a guy who just scrapped it out like 3, 4, 5 years ago and talk to them about their experience and how they had setbacks and whatever else. I can barely even remember my setbacks.
Yeah.
So you have to realize that at a certain point, your point of view to this person is not terribly interesting or valid. I mean, which is why you need a team. And I'm going to make sure that like the backgrounds of the people who end up on the board are within. I mean, there'll be mostly people of color, but I mean that's a very diverse group of people. You might have people from inner city Chicago, and then you have me, and then you got different sorts that can bring people of different ages. That'll bring a different perspective to how we're thinking about doing this thing.
Yeah.
On the distilling side, it's the Nathan Green Scholarship, which will be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I need to do now, and with everything else going on, I haven't had that much time to get into this work, is to look for the analogs of the many programs that I'm already familiar with on the brewing side. So if I say ABG or the UC Davis courses or the Cornell courses or the MBAA courses, like I know what the courses are that people hire brewers out of.
Yeah.
What I don't know is what are the courses that people hire distillers out of.
Okay.
And so, but that's not that hard to find out.
Sure.
I mean, I work with people. We establish, a list, and if somebody wants to attend a course that's off that list, then we will have to assess that course to see whether it meets our standards, which means that we'll have to have a set of standards. Even the courses that we already know about, we will have to reassess now during the pandemic times to see whether the course is still as valid as it used to be when it gained its reputation.
Okay.
Because there may be some things that were great, but now they're kind of phoning it in, literally and figuratively. And so, there's a lot to build out. But on the other hand, it's actually, as hard as I've been working, like 12, 14 hours a day, every day, it's also very simple. There's not that much to it. It's not the Fire Festival or something where you're going to, you're going to have thousands of guests, and there's 12 bands and whatever else.
Yeah.
It's like there's going to be every year there's going to be a couple of dozen tops of people that you're going to send on a course, which means a couple of dozen checks and a couple of dozen resumes and interviews and setups, but it's not like ridiculously huge.
Yeah.
The really hard part is setup and governance. How do you make it transparent, fair, representative, etc., and set up a structure where when I leave it in 5 years, it will really just run. And it's not taking up 100% of anybody's time.
Right.
Because it is structurally simple. You're connecting people, and you're giving them advice, and you're helping them along financially.
And that'll be the plan for about a dozen or so scholarships per year?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that within a year or two, we should get up to that. I would be surprised if in the first slate, we had more than, say, 6 to 8.
Okay.
You want to concentrate, I would say, really carefully on, your first slate of people who go in and really give them extra resources to make sure they win. You're going to be learning things at the same time as they are. What works, what doesn't work, what are the real supports they need versus what you thought they were going to need. These things are going to have changes and wobbles and whatever else, but none of them fatal.
Mm-hmm.
and you'll put people through these courses, and you have to have standards of performance. What do you, if you're going to give somebody $10,000 or even like $3,000 to go to a packaging course, what do you require of them? And eventually, we require that these people are willing to be, mentor to at least one person coming up at some time behind them.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to give somebody a scholarship and then later I say to them, "Hey, would you be the mentor to this guy coming in?" And they say no. Like that's not the right spirit.
Right.
The whole idea is that like you're passing this thing on, and you pass the baton back.
Um, I don't want to keep you too much longer. So, the right now you're thinking 200,000 for the initial GoFundMe.
That will be the stated goal,
Okay.
of the opening GoFundMe campaign will be two
Okay.
hundred thousand
And
dollars.
is this going to be one of
Frankly,
those ones where
I
it's
hope to raise a lot more,
sure?
um, through which will be, basically private. People can speak of it or not. I've already had breweries. I mean, you've probably seen other half as publicly committed a certain amount of money to it, and I'll be sending emails to people,
Yeah.
at breweries saying, like, what do you, can you do something here?
Um, and is this going to be one of those ones where it's an all or nothing fund campaign, or if if it winds up that you raise 195,000, are you
No,
still
no. I
gonna?
mean,
Yeah.
GoFundMe doesn't work, in the Kickstarter model where it's all or nothing.
Okay, that's what I was confused about. So I just wanted
Yeah,
to make
yeah.
sure that was the case. And then
No, no, it's not. It's not a thumbs up or thumbs down, thing. I'm not really, interested in that.
okay,
And I think that I forget. I was looking at it a couple of weeks ago, but the term of everything is longer. You can keep your campaign open longer. It's not like you have 10 days or 30 days or something to hit your goal. So, you'll see a lot from me and some others on social media about it as it goes out. I mean, at first, really, it's going to have its own website. It's going to have the GoFundMe page. It's going to have my Instagram, et cetera. But then it's going to have eventually its own Instagram, its own Twitter, and, its own Facebook page. And over time, the identity, if you like, of the foundation will divorce from mine.
mm-hmm.
Not that I won't mention it or something, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to have its own life if it's going to, be a sustainable thing.
Okay, that works. Aside from the guys at Other Half, have there been other folks that have sort of, you think, stepped up that?
Oh, a lot of people have stepped in saying, like, when the time comes, like, let me know. And they may not have given me a specific number. There have been people who said, like, I want to do something, like I'm a microbiologist for this brewery, and it's like I would love to have people come and give them training or whatever else, which may not even be specifically connected to our program.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, my feeling is that I want there to be offshoots. If you don't make this particular scholarship, but you are definitely somebody that you know has a great future in them, maybe we can do something on the side and put you together with, like, okay, you didn't make it in this round, why don't you reapply? But how about you go see so and so over here at this brewery because they would like to give you like a couple of weeks in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so part of it is you have to have a sufficient outreach so that people know that, like, that you're doing this work. And then a lot of it is just connections. You're helping connect people who want to get somewhere with other people. And I do this all the time. I mean, like, informally through Instagram or whatever else, somebody gets in touch out of the blue and says, hey, I'm so and so from wherever, I've been looking for a brewing job in this place, do you know anybody? And I'm like, sure, let me put you together with
Yeah.
them. You saw, if you follow me on Twitter, you saw, like, a couple of days ago, this kid that I know in Scotland, his shop is closing. He's been running, beer shops for 10 years.
Yep.
And he just sent me his CV this morning, and I sent it to our people and retweeted it and whatever else. I mean, that's the That's kind of like using, using the chair, so to speak. Oh, the thing that I didn't finish saying,
Okay.
actually, was I did go to Fresh Fest. And what I
Right.
found at Fresh Fest was not like a segregated beer festival, but in fact, the most integrated beer festival by far that I had ever seen. It was maybe 70, 75% African American, but there was also 30, 35% of everybody else.
Yeah.
There was never 35% of anybody else at the GABF or any other festival I'd ever been to.
Right.
And they were, black, white, gay, straight, trans, lots of women. It was the happiest and most joyful beer festival I'd ever seen, by far, really. I mean, it was beautiful. People were crying all over the place. I mean, just spontaneously because of the emotion of the day. And, I realized, like, well, this is the way we see ourselves. And we're not like this most of the time, and if everybody in the community showed up, we would actually all enjoy the thing we're doing a lot better than we're enjoying it now.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes everybody else, whether you're white or black or Latino or Asian. When everybody shows up, you're going to feel better, in tap rooms and breweries that look like America,
Right.
which they currently do not.
It'd be nice. Yeah, to see more of that. I mean, especially when we all can start going to festivals again. But
Yeah, and you can't start off with an idea. It's like, oh, here comes Garrett. He's going to fix this. Like, Garrett's not going to fix anything. Garrett's going to do his part.
Okay.
And which is the best that anyone can do.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you're doing this, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it, certainly. So,
well, definitely appreciate the attention.
That's Garrett Oliver of the Brooklyn Brewery and founder of the Michael Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling. Check out themjf.org to learn more and to donate. My thanks again to Wine Enthusiast Magazine for letting me air this audio from an interview I did on their behalf. Check out winemag.com for great content and to subscribe to the print magazine. Before we go, I'll remind you that this show is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and also download the Beer Edge podcast hosted by Andy Crouch with new episodes every week. And also check out Steal This Beer and the BYO Nano podcast. And please don't forget to go onto Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and leave a review of this show. If you have questions or suggestions or guests you'd like to hear, you can email me at johnholl, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or you can reach out on Twitter at John_Hall. Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and my thanks to you for listening. I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back to drink beer and to think beer.